Energy justice is making sure we have a conversation about the next phase of energy that involves the people who will be responsible for storing it, dealing with it, processing it, and living around it so that they do not feel like we took all their choices from them.
I'm Carolyn Parrs, clean tech communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a just transition to a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. If affordable, reliable, clean energy that benefits everyone is important to you, you're in the right place, my friend. We have the power to make that happen, and that's what's happening each week on the Just Power podcast. Welcome to Just Power. I am delighted to welcome Tamara Toles-O'Laughlin, a force of nature in environmental advocacy and energy justice. She is the president and CEO of the Environmental Grantmakers Association, which leads a network of over 200 foundations that manage, get this, nearly $200 billion, that's a B, in assets that go directly to environmental causes. But what makes her extra extraordinary to me is her understanding that environmental work is not just about tech advances. That's important. But it's also about people. That's why she founded Climate Critical, a global support system and network for environmentalists dealing with burnout. Boy, is that needed. So let's get ready for a conversation that will challenge us, inspire, and shift your perspective on energy justice. Welcome, Tamara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm so excited to have you too. You've had over 2 decades, right, of environmental work. And I wanted to start with just like, how did that all begin for you?
Let's see. So I am a second generation environmentalist.
All right.
In New York City. My mom worked at the Department of Environmental Protection in New York City, which is both an water regulator and a utility. And so, that just the tension of being both those things, like if we're confronted with whether you need to conserve water, protect water, or charge people for it, there's a lot of gray area that comes up in doing that sort of thing. And frankly, she was around when they were trying to figure out. I remember being a kid and she's like, they're going to charge for water. How do you do that? And my whole family laughed like, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, next they're going to be charging for air. So, 30 some odd years later, these things take shape. So when I was a kid, I knew that you turn on the water and the faucet comes in, but there is a police force that has to protect that water to make sure people don't put cars in it and change their tires and throw the tires in the water or overfish it so that it doesn't work, or all those things simultaneously because people have different needs for water. Energy requires a ridiculous amount of water. So like if you're in a conversation about energy, you're having a conversation about water because you got to cool things. You need water to move things. It is a vehicle, a conduit. It's also energy itself. And so in some ways, I've always been in this work because I was a little kid on the playground who was like, do you know that there's like a system of pipes that goes through your house that connects to the system of pipe that goes onto water that goes upstate to be able to pump people at the playground? Yeah, like people you don't even talk to make sure you can turn your faucet on and have water. Also, there's fluoride in it, and there's people fighting about what that means. I think some of these fights have been around only because there's new people to fight them every generation. And so I'm just stepping into the role I have in this generation to be a part of the conversation we have to have every time a new group of people's on the planet.
Wow, you were like steeped in this from the time that you were a little girl, right?
I would say I'm probably a Aquanet ozone layer environmentalist, right? Like I just hated because I remember thinking, let's just solve it all if we just get the hair to go down in New Jersey and Baltimore. We'll be able to fix the ozone layer so Free Willy can get back out into the ocean, right? So,
yeah, right.
It's something different, and we're not.
Got it. So, right from the beginning, well, in some ways, that's oh boy, that's you were primed from the beginning, and you just kept it going, right? In your career and your work. So I know that part of that journey for you has been in the energy sector. And we're talking about energy justice and equity
Yes.
today, right? Tell me how energy justice became a focus for you.
Well, so in the early 2000s, when it made a little bit less sense than it does right now, I went to one of the coolest, crunchiest, most granola law schools in the country. I went to Vermont Law School, which is now Vermont Law and Graduate School. And, it's literally someone was like, I bet you have granola in your pocket right now. And I looked in my pocket and I was like, actually, I do. So not implicated by that, but it's because it's cold here, and if you get stuck somewhere, you don't have any food, you could die. So like,
Oh,
there's
it was
actually
very
like
practical.
there's a reason why you have granola in your pocket in these long distances, because it might just be you and Earth making decisions about your next couple of hours. And so, like by going there, I got to spend time with people who are laser focused on the environment. Like, how do you get soil to have enough nutrients in it to grow food? How do you have water that is serviceable for industry and for people? How do you know who decides how much of a thing people have access to make sure it's available in the future? And one of the programs they had when I was doing my law degree and my master's there was an energy law program. And it was one of the first I had heard of in the country. So my master's that I got at the same time as my JD is an energy generation carbon constraint, right? So it's like 18 years.
Wow. How long
My
ago was that?
18 years ago. So technically, my master's degree could take your kid out for a date and it would be legal. So, like, not quite ready to go for a drink, but it's been a while. And thinking about what it means to renegotiate every generation, how you
Mm.
get enough energy to power what people need in a life that feels like a life to people, not just labor, is a big conversation. You could just talk about a species and how it's going to impact them or people and what they need about it. But every time there are more people, there's almost 8 billion people on the planet. In order for them all to live comfortably, we have to come to some agreements about how we make energy, who's responsible for it, under what decision, like what decisions have to be
Yeah.
made to make sure you can guarantee it, and who has to pay for it. And so this stuff feels esoteric and is full of lots of acronyms and people with really nice suits to talk about it. But frankly, you know, just like food, you vote on what you're going to eat 3 times a day if you're lucky. You are voting on where power comes from, how much it costs, and who makes those decisions in so much of your life that it feels
Right.
invisible, but it's everywhere.
That's right. Flip on the switch, right? At any
That's
time
right.
you're voting. Yeah, and a lot of people don't feel like they have a choice. I
Oh,
mean, some places do
yeah.
have more choices than others, but everything's changing. It feels right. We're in a transition, an energy transition. So let me ask this: um, what does? Because I ask this for every one of our guests. What does energy justice mean to you?
Huh. Well, energy justice means to me that every time a new group of people has to negotiate how we make sure people have access to basic care. So if you're a sick person and you need medicine and it needs to be cold, you need a refrigerator. If you like to eat, you need a refrigerator. If we are consistently factoring in that things have changed every time we make these decisions, that what we thought was a good idea yesterday might not be a good idea today because we learned more or we saw things play out in ways that we didn't. As long as that conversation is open to everybody who will experience the impact of it, then that's energy justice. Because frankly, the technology hasn't changed that much in 30 years. Like we're not talking about vastly different things. Nuclear, water, geothermal. Like we're just not,
Solar, spin
yeah, we're just
around, right? Yeah.
right. We are not talking about 50 years of new tech. We're talking about 50 years of agreements about how we're going to use it and what that means for the people who comes
Mm.
next. So energy justice is making sure we have a conversation about the next phase of energy that involves the people who will be responsible for storing it, dealing with it, processing it, and living around it so that they do not feel like we took all their choices from them.
I love that definition. I love that definition, right? Having conversations with people, everyone that
Yeah.
has energy in their lives, not just
Yes.
some.
Yes.
So very cool. Um, so I just want to talk just a little bit about the communities, right? That often, they call them environmental justice communities or disproportionately affected communities, right? How would you define the communities that are mostly affected by the energy policies we're talking about, or legacy issues? How would you define that?
Wow, every kind. So I was lucky enough to work in the O'Malley administration in Maryland, around about the time when there's $55 million fund every year for people to spend on alternatives. So this is like standard money that comes out of the state budget, that comes from the people and goes back to the people. One of the big challenges we had at that time was trying to get people to spend it. They like spend money on energy. I'm used to it coming to my house. What do you mean these all these other ways that we could spend the money? And like some of it is just getting people to think that they have some role because it's such a part of life. You don't think it involves process or structure or infrastructure or people. Um, I think it has been in trying to wrestle with the technical parts and focus on the people. You could go to Potomac, Maryland, where those are
Mm.
objectively wealthy people's homes. If you talk to them about what was cool energy during the Aquanet and Free Willy era of in climate and environment, it was some stuff that is now buried in their front and backyards
Yep.
that poisons their aquifers. These are people of wealth who did not think that the thing they were doing, when you could still put microwave some popcorn and you put it on your stove and you shake it and it blows up into a thing that kind of looks like you have big hair. Like at that time, propane was the thing to do. And so you have a tank, it buried underground. The people who
Yeah.
live there die, and then that stuff becomes poison that messes with the aquifer, so that the people who live there don't have
Mm.
safe water to drink. That
Mm.
community is as potent, viable, valuable, and people who need information on what's happening under the soil before they buy a house as folks who live down the road from them in Brandywine, Maryland, who have a compressor station and who have 4 or 5 plants and have air quality issues on top of it. And so like people think of these two groups as being vastly different.
Yes, we
They have
do.
totally different sets of champions who are fighting at different levels of government with different levels of people they could talk to. They are all people who were born in a place and they live somewhere and they assume that that place is safe for them. And to some degree, they're right, and to some degree, they're wrong. Both of them are being polluted. And the energy justice question is, did they know that the thing that we thought was cool, but didn't make any plans to recycle, upcycle, or remove that stuff, they were going to be harmed in either case? Did we decide
Yeah.
that the compressor station, the pump station, the pipelines that were going to be there, who made a plan when they built it to make sure that if it rusted, got a hole, or caused other problems, somebody would be around to clean it up?
Right. And that really wasn't on the ticket. Right.
Eh,
And there weren't a lot of people
Yes.
around making sure that they did the right thing.
Yeah,
Right. Or they had those checks and balances. Right.
that's right. Yeah.
So, and you're just saying like now it's coming home to roost, right? Like you have propane and, that leaks.
Yes.
So,
It's also true in New York City. I mean, everybody knows the giant GE plants that were on the Hudson River, and very few people are around who could talk about what it took to make that kind of energy show up, what that did to the water, what that means for people who want to use that water for fishing. And here we are again in a conversation about energy and water. And if you're talking to people who only talk about water, you are leaving out folks who are like, but I live here. I need all of that to work for me. And so
yes.
whether they are riverbed communities, rural communities, urban communities, people who live in the suburbs, people assume that the air they breathe is clean, the water they drink is usable, and the power they have comes from someone who gave some thought to the life cycle costs of using all of it. And mostly that's not true.
That's right. That is right. But here we are today,
Yeah.
right? We are today in an energy, I'm going to say that again. I mean, we have been in an energy transition, but it's kind of ramped up,
Yeah.
especially I'd say in the last 5 years. So this is kind of a two-part question. What to you is the importance of energy justice now? I think you're actually saying it in your stories, but
Yeah.
what is the importance of energy justice in our transition today?
We're going to make decisions that make it easier for other people to live or make the lives they live harder to achieve. So like if we don't make good decisions today about how we make our energy, we could eat up other people's water. like our own kids. If you have kids, you have grandkids, you have neighbors, you got kids you just like, you're a big brother, a big sister, your aunt, your uncle. We're actively making decisions today about what energy is available for us that will make decisions about that next group of people's choices. And energy justice is deciding that what we need today doesn't foreclose decisions for other people tomorrow. If we make decisions today that we think are neutral and they turn out to be bad, are we going to be available to point out that we didn't have all the answers? Are we going to test any of it? Some of it is just figuring out, well, how bad is it? Is it like it takes 500,000 years? Like, so, in the case of nuclear, you make a decision that we're going to put all the waste from nuclear in a specific place. And then we going to make sure people don't live there for 500,000 years? Or are we going to make sure that people don't come in contact with that? Have we made a plan for it? That's energy justice. It sounds weird and it sounds cartoonish, but like whether people pay too much for power today so that they're choosing between being in one of the coldest days they've ever experienced and turning the heat up so they don't freeze, or whether or not they can live in places that will be safe for them because the energy usage has been thought about for however long that energy is going to be impacting the land. Those are the same decisions because at the end of the day, you're looking at your pocket, your wallet, your life, and trying to make decisions.
Yeah, those awarenesses or questions are, I would just say, more than ever been more prevalent, right? Yeah. Are we there yet? No, right? Because we're fighting for it still. that we have everyone at the table, or these questions are actually asked and there's a say, not just listened to, but you actually have a say. So
but
all of that.
Pays for it? Yeah. But also who pays for it? I mean, I have been in rooms where people have said, okay, cool. So there's all these new technologies. It costs a certain amount of dollars to be able to even try them out. And then the next day it says, well, you have to have good credit. Well, who determines if you have good credit? What does that mean? Like are you a part of the formal economy? Are you a part of the informal economy? How do you make your money? Is that counted in ways that allow you to build credit so that you could go get a loan to do a cool new energy thing that you might like? So you want solar in your house? You have $15,000 hanging around somewhere? Then it's easy for you to say,
and that's cheap.
Right, to see if I can get a system or see if I can afford a monthly payment to pool my resources with other people to do that. And if folks say, well, you can't even be involved in that unless you have good credit. Well, did you ask me questions about the rest of my life and why it's possible for me to buy a ticket to be for tomorrow's lottery if I don't have the resources today, and what it means for the whole planet to benefit from us answering these questions as though people are coming into the conversation at a time they didn't choose, in a tax bracket they didn't choose, in a country they may or may not have chosen. Like these questions are different if you're in the U.S., if you're outside the U.S., if you're in the South, if you're in the mountains, if you're in the East. Like these are all, your access to energy is different. So the answers have to be about building community because somebody's got to hold that nuance with you. You can live near the desert and have tons of sun, but if you don't have any tools to absorb it, it's not any more of a benefit to you than somebody who lives in the mountains and has a ton of solar. Yeah.
So, wow, that's huge. I love that. I love what you're saying, Tamara. You're making it's so practical. It's so real. It's just it's so the way it is.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, there's no sugarcoating it. You have a way of really speaking straight, like they would say, truth to power. Right. So I just had to say that because,
I think sometimes it feels like 6 people got together and decide what was going to happen with energy. And every time a new group of people is born, you're like, why are you stupid? You were left out of it. Like, I wasn't left out of it. I wasn't born. I wasn't born into the conversation. And so some of energy justice is making sure other people understand the conversation and continually being able to have language that is accessible to folks so that they don't feel like, oh, well, I'm sorry, you don't have as many degrees as I do. Like I spent a lot of time in my life talking to people with varying levels of education for reasons that are bigger than me, more important than what I'm doing, involve lots of deep questions, but they have a right to be able to make choices about how they are going to interact, like what they spend their money on. But if they don't know where their energy comes from, they don't know that they have a right to weigh in on it, and that there's people whose job it is to ask them questions, to involve them in it, and it could be resources to help them if they're living at the lowest possible quality of life in a town that is rich because no one's asked them why it is they're still on propane. So let's say you're not the person
Yeah.
who lives in the mansion who had propane and is dealing with poisoned water aquifer. You're the person who lives down the road and you have it because your neighbor had it. And so you have a little small house that's connected to them. And turns out people with resources are able to say, I have money, I'm going to get this other thing. And you're stuck because you don't have that kind of money for a number of reasons. You have a right to say, well, if everyone's getting off of this thing and onto that thing, how do we develop a mechanism for me to get onto it too? So that one, we're all getting the benefit out of it. Like community solar is one of those projects that says that you might live in an apartment building somewhere in a city or in a rural space where there's cooperative housing to save money, to save heat, to make things sure things are weatherized. You have every right to say, is that the best possible technology that we have? And if not, can I get in line to get it? Because like you, I would like to have more of my money to do whatever I
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. This is a beautiful segue to what I want just to touch on is the Justice 40, right? And we're 2 years into a 10-year program, and now we have a changing administration. And
Not
not
to
to go
go
too far down that that
no, no.
rabbit
I mean,
hole.
to be fair, it was on schedule. We run an election every certain number of years.
Okay, right. Thank you.
A nation's report card as a poli scientist, political scientist, an old school political scientist. I'm pretty happy that enough people showed up to take the test. What we
Um,
do with the answers to the test is another question, but like, getting enough people to vote so that we know what the heck people want to talk about is a factor of whether we have justice.
yeah. Yes. Yes. So, Justice 40, what's your
Yeah.
take on that? Right? And where do we go from here?
Yeah.
And I know there's no definitive answers right now about this, but I just wanted to, like, what does Tamara think about this?
I think that justice, a wise man whose birthday was very recently, that the nation celebrates Martin Luther King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, justice is our expression of love into the future. Right.
Oh,
So
yeah.
frankly, what we're talking about is, do we have capacity to make room for people who need different things from their government in 10 years? Who's not for that? Like, I can't imagine why we wouldn't want to factor in people with the least access to power, the least supports, the most disadvantaged into a conversation where they will either show up as labor, they will either show up as community, they will show up as challengers. Like, Justice 40 just says we should probably set aside money to make sure people who wouldn't get into this conversation have the ability to be in the conversation, because they're going to get into it whether they're at the end in a litigation or in a brawl on the street or in a protest. It might actually be cheaper if we factor in that there will be a number of people for whom getting into this conversation will cost more than they can afford, and make room to think about what they might need with them in the future. Like, there's a lot of fancy words and slogans and programs and partisans and people who have feelings about it. But that's what we're actually talking about, is if you live in rural America or you live in an urban center, you deserve to be able to weigh in on whether or not you can choose how you power your life.
Yes. Yes. And that brings me to communities and having meaningful engagement with them, right? And that you actually hear that word as it's on the White House website, right?
Yeah.
Meaningful engagement. So what does that mean, right? There's not really guidelines that I saw, right? And every, we're talking the energy system, or even different utilities or wherever you live, everyone interprets that differently. So for you, I'd like to know, like, what would you say would be like some specific steps or even best practices that you have either seen executed or should be, that to ensure meaningful engagement with communities, right?
So
That we're talking about.
So meaningful engagement is as American as apple pie, or it should be, because frankly, you can't get to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness if you don't have a role in the conversation about your life that involves your opinion. Meaningful engagement just means If you're doing something on my street, I'm aware of it, and you tell me in enough time that if I have a piece of information you might need, because the desire to come in and do something has nothing to do with all the things that have happened there before, all the things that could happen there, all the ways people use that space. So meaningful engagement means, are you bringing people in so that the data they hold in their stories, their experience, in their lives makes it to the conversation before too many things have happened to do anything about it? It also means being able to stop something if you know a bad consequence is coming that isn't apparent to everyone else in the room. And frankly, that's the best thing you can have for business. As a woman who's a CEO and a founder, let me tell you, nothing saves me money like avoiding problems. Like all the money you save from finding out that someone next to the thing you're building had a sense that actually before you thought this was a prime piece of property, they did something underground that's going to make that more expensive. Or people are growing food, or this is really close to a water source. As an investor, it's really challenging to want to build something with so many question marks. So, frankly, meaningful engagement means bringing in all the people to give you the data you need to assess whether or not it's actually a good deal. And what the people in the community get out of it is some buy-in so that you're not a predator coming in to make things happen to them, not for them. So, frankly,
meaningful engagement is profitable then, you're saying, for companies and investors, right? Because you get to know about your investment. Like, is this a good one or not?
And even if you're doing something that folks might not appreciate, it's better to know who doesn't appreciate it. I spend a lot of time as a part of my work across the movement, 28 years of work, regardless of the job, evaluating whether an idea is actually good. And the best way for me to do it is to figure out from whose perspective is it good. And if the best piece of data I can get is what happened before I walked into this conversation, what was already moving, what were the plans in place? Because then that means if I can figure out who else wants to be in it, we build something together. It goes a lot further than all the hours. I mean, I'm trained
What
as a lawyer.
happened before I showed up here?
Yeah.
Like, how far down, the road is the ball, right?
Yeah.
And where are they steering it? Which
I
way
mean,
are they steering it?
how great is it for your bottom line if your main product kills people? I mean, at the end of the day, we can make power in ways that literally kill people. We can make power in ways that save lives. We can make power in ways that limit our access to resources. All of that should be an assessment of whether or not this is actually a good deal. And any smart business person would be really focused on that because businesses outlast people.
Yes.
Just like governments outlast people. So what it's supposed to do is take what the individual group of people who are alive right now think is important and enshrine that into a policy that becomes the future to be renegotiated by the next group of people about, well, that mattered to them. Does that matter to us? So in order for it to be meaningful engagement, I should be able to have weighed in on whatever it is so much so that you know what my perspective is. Whether we all agree to it or not, meaningful engagement means I'm in it, I'm aware of it, I can tell you everything that's true about it, and you can evaluate whether that's true and whether my liabilities are your liabilities.
Yeah, beautifully said. So we're talking about weighing in. So what questions, let's just say an energy provider, because we're talking about energy, what questions should they be asking their communities but aren't?
Do you want this?
That is not a trick question.
No. I mean, one of the questions is, do you want this and why? Like, I think just asking the question, half the time people just want to be heard. Like, there are things people will say, I have sat in hearings when as a former lobbyist in Maryland, people wanted to put up offshore wind. There was an offshore wind energy area that was set up in 2015. And guess what? It might actually start at some point, right? Like it's been a while. And I remember writing the first press release for that wind energy area and being so excited, like, yeah, we're going to try it. And then sitting in rooms over many, many years later, people going, I don't think I want it because it gives me headaches. I don't think I want it because it'll kill that bird. And like some of the most powerful questions are, what bird? What bird will it kill? Are you aware of what bird it will kill? Have you seen it kill any birds? Or you just got an idea from somebody that it might kill some birds? And I think and half the people who stood online to have the conversation just wanted to be in a room where someone cared what they said. They showed up to say, you're going to put this thing, is it going to interfere with my view of the beach? And the answer is no, not unless you have bionic eyes, in which case you don't, this is not your problem anyway. But half the people in the room were just wanted to know, are you going to do something that means my quality of life and the summers that I work hard for? Will I have the thing I spent all my life working for to have my summers on the beach be taken away from me because you're going to put up these windmills? Are they going to be ugly? Are they going to scare away the birds? Is it going to make it so I can't fish here anymore? And by answering those questions, people get told, no, here's how we're protecting the fish. So you don't need a rumor. Here's some facts. Here are some ways other people are using it. Actually, now that you mention it, this bird that flies here will be impacted. We can make it taller or shorter to avoid that. Here are some people who love birds where you live who tell us where the birds are flying to get where they're going in the south when it's winter before you take your beach vacation, in the summer. And I think meaningful engagement means being able to say, I have concerns. Are they valid? And if they are, what are we going to do about it?
There's so much wisdom in just really, first of all, approaching and asking and really listening, right? And just really listening and not, forcing an opinion or even telling them telling them what's happening, but just meaning we're telling you what's going down here and whether you like it or not. But just the listening process, and people want to be heard. And then you can negotiate or even have that input and make a pivot, a tweak, a different pathway. So it's not that hard. I just think sometimes that a lot of our energy providers are often, I say this, and with a lot of love in my heart, are a lot of engineers, right? Who are designing from their little cubby holes, and they understand that really, really well. But there's a human side to energy, right? That I think energy companies need to wake up to.
Or they don't like birds. It didn't occur to them. Like, it's like every year I like to see the Oriole bird when it's going from here to there, right? I'm just pick Maryland. I have a family, some Baltimoreans in it, so I gotta shout them out whenever, wherever I'm anywhere. And I think the idea that I hadn't considered that there was a bird that you care about that flies past here. Well, I'm not trying to kill any birds. I'm just trying to make sure this whole coast has energy. So just saying, here's a thing I thought about that you hadn't considered, or I have read somewhere on the internet that this thing will give me headaches. I don't want any headaches. And the person saying, I see that's not true. There might have been something going on in that community where there was another thing that caused it, or some combination of things that caused it. Communities call cumulative impacts. And to be able to say it took 50 years to open up a conversation about how I might want to do something that's great. And the thing I might cost a lot of money, which means you got to come out of your pocket to help pay for this thing. Who says what's fair? That's an important question we should all be involved in. But if this thing is going to bring in new energy, we should talk about the last time somebody came through your town and put something in without talking to you about it, and how what I'm doing might affect what they're doing and what that means for your health. And telling people, I'm not listening to you, I have made my choice, is the best way to make things expensive, take a really long time, and build up animus and hatred in a community where you could actually be doing something people need. Like making their energy bills cheaper, which nobody's going to fight you about if you actually talked about what your concerns are and admitted to what's the same and what's different.
So then, yes, energy providers and communities can really work together as co-creators in these energy transition.
And it's yes, especially if energy providers are willing to admit that they have had home court advantage since time immemorial. Stop pretending that to make these changes is going to cost them everything. Frankly, in most cases, if your business is relying on technology that literally requires dinosaurs to be dead and in the ground, at some point you're going to change your business model. Instead of that being a surprise to the community, wouldn't it be great if y'all had sight lines on it together? We are in this geography. There's only so much energy. It's going to come from here and there. And people are like, well, I'm not getting anything out of that, so I'm going to pick at you. Guess what? People have the right to do that, but they're mostly doing it to get information you could have given them. It makes the project take longer. It means people are not being honest. It means we're not shifting technologies from the thing that was great when, I'm a George Washington Carver fan, right? So, soil, peanuts, oil. There was a moment in history where we could have had petrol oil, which we currently use now, or peanut oil, those were equally viable moments in our energy story as a country. And for one reason or another, we went in the direction of petroleum. There's real reasons behind that. Instead of peanut oil, imagine the kind of problems we might have if we
The
just
shelves, that's for sure.
no, yeah, but you could also use it for soil, which makes food grow, nutrient dense. But I feel like we could have run those experiments simultaneously. And then we have two options for what we're going to do, not one option that we are wedded to and other options that seem scary because we haven't tried them. And so I do think that there are communities are pit as bad guys, people who slow things down, people who have questions, and often it's just because they weren't factored into the model about how you make money. And anybody who
That's
builds
very good.
models
This
like
has
an
been coming up
engineer.
a lot. That it actually was a time constraint, right? We hear that, like, we need to decarb. I say
Yes.
this all the time, tomorrow, right? But the truth of the matter, there's been so many cases where they went fast forward and they got crushed, and they had to go back.
Okay.
And do a lot of due diligence and reparations because of the methods, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
have been done. So, yeah. So actually, you're saying if you build it in, right? If it becomes integrated, it becomes systematic, right?
Yep.
Then it could be really profitable. It
Yes.
could be a win-win for everyone.
Also, it would allow us to factor in people not hating you, fighting you, or despising you, or lighting candles in hopes that bad things happen to you as a part of profit. Like it'd be really great if we could figure out that everybody wants air conditioning when it's hot, and it shouldn't cost some people everything.
Yeah. 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 Right on. All right. So we said yes, they can work together. Are there any examples or programs that you've been involved with or know of where that really worked well? Case studies, like,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think in the state of Maryland and the folks who would come by to get this annual money that was available to the state, there were farms. There were farms that made ice cream, and they were like, well, we have what could become one type of fuel that comes literally out of the cows. And we have this other, but what impacts does it have on a community? We're located in the area where we could have solar panels because we have all these buildings that could be here. It has no emissions. It doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't create more of a problem than the livestock for a community full of farmers. And people saying, well, wait a minute, my own state has a trust fund that allows me to experiment with ways of getting power, because if I just use generators, I could be poisoning my own stock. Like as a farmer, you're like, do I want to power the thing that makes me money on a thing that makes what makes the money sick, or my neighbors sick, or my family who lives at that farm sick? Like these are not isolated questions. It's not either or. I think that there are opportunities where folks who are being smart are partnering with the other institutions and groups and communities around them to figure out what the win-win actually is. There are way too many options in the breadbasket of environment and energy options to be able to think that what works in one place works in another. There might be reasons, there might be seasons. I feel like in Denver, Colorado, where they basically pioneered the use of biofuels. It gets so cold there and so warm there that they figured out before other people what's the right mix of fuel between waste fuel and other things so that it doesn't freeze, so that what you counted on as an energy solution doesn't become a liability later on. And I think you only get that if you get all the data. So whether it's figuring out how to make sure the school bus doesn't poison the children while they wait for the bus, because what's coming out of the tailpipe destroys all the people at the height that need the air that are clean. Like, it's kind of hard to cart kids to school if you're giving them all asthma and then expect them to be great at gym.
Oh, no.
So I do think that there are different counties, different municipalities that have made small choices, whether it's changing the fleet of buses or changing the public bus system or educating folks on when and how they use power. A great group I really enjoyed, O Power. One of the things they did was have a bunch of contests where they would say, your neighbor is using this much energy. How much are you using? And by tapping into people's community instinct would get people to gamify whether or not at the times when the most power is needed, they are ratcheting it down on their own grown because today we have virtual power plants. We have things where people can pool together all the things that make energy so that the whole load is met at times that people need it without harming anybody else's quality of life. If you usher that in secretly, people are like, I don't want anything virtually in my house. What do you mean my toast is going to be ratcheting up and down? I need my toast to be this way. I have a lot of feelings about my toast. And then you're in a fight instead of just saying, what we're going to do is we've identified based on how often people are using something that we could take a little bit of energy from here and keep the whole community going without anyone being losing their quality of life or access to machines that they need for their breathing or their life or their refrigeration. And so there are examples of how by being honest about what our assets are, the we is better served.
Yeah. You're talking about a transformation, a huge transformation. When I say huge, it's like, it doesn't sound so huge the way we're talking about talking with people, coming together. But because the system has been in a certain way, really for sometimes 100 years, right? We're in our energy system. It feels like a 180. So here it is. What kind of transformation needs to happen with energy providers for our system to be truly equitable?
They need to go into their bank account and decide that the old ratchet pull and stick system that they have used is probably not as efficient as they would like to say it is, and then not try to pass that cost on to people who have not been brought into this conversation. Like, they have had a market without contest for 100 years. They can afford a little bit of investment to be able to make sure the next part of the conversation lets people know what they're doing, why they're taking down what people are used to, what alternatives are there. And that money should be paid by the people who've been banking, compound banking interest on being able to charge you every month come hella high water to make sure that the power keeps going through your house. And if you could help the people who are the poorest in your community to have rooftops so that they could take advantage of the state thing that allows them to get solar, you become a friend to your community as opposed to someone who's just on their bill. And I think that there are opportunities for that everywhere if we talk about the need to pivot our thirst for energy to match the future we're building. So much of the future relies on having a steady supply of energy. Where's the community conversation? Like the United States as a group. Where's our conversation about what's on the table and why and what it costs people? People shouldn't have to consider whether or not their great-grandparents dying having a great-grandfather who was in a mine is going to be revisited on their kid to be able to have some batteries in their cell phone. Like that's a real conversation. What are the trade-offs? Who's making the trade? We agree that costs enough. Are we agreeing that a certain amount of energy comes from this thing while we figure out what's going on with that thing, and can we get it to scale? And I think the biggest mistake we make over and over again is assuming that the people who would do the mining don't have thoughts. The people who would pay the bill don't have thoughts. The engineer who is designing the model knows all the things. Like, every time we assume that people don't have dynamism, we create opportunity for what's been going on as the status quo to continue for another day, even when it's outmoded. And so many utilities come from 6 people deciding what we were going to do about energy. And frankly, if it was any other product, they would have had a review by now.
Okay. And that's another whole conversation. I'm going to pivot a bit here because you are a policy girl. Okay. And we're seeing energy equity, like, quote unquote, a rising priority for policymakers, commissioners, regulators. Why do you think this is happening now? And what does it mean for energy providers?
I think the deciders at each level are so powerful. Like, I think what happens at the local level, what happens at the level of a municipality, what happens at the state level is decided by groups of people. And if it feels like 6 people decided 100 years how we're going to do it, that's connected to who gets elected in the office. And that person, whether they know or care about it, says, I'm going to ask you, and you to make decisions about our energy for the state. Some of the most powerful governors, smartest folks I have known have been people who said, I know a lot about a lot, but I don't know a lot about that. And they and they came in with questions to figure out who has the best ideas about what we're doing here for energy. So like, what are we doing about recycling? What are we doing about what it costs to power something up and to power it down? What are we doing about those periods when the weather might make it so that our gas station, the power might go out at a gas station or a hospital? And how are we making sure that those things that everyone needs at some point will be able to work no matter what? The smartest folks in government have said, I don't actually know the answer to that. Let's go in with a question and find out who does, and then pick based on what we need what it's going to take. And that means involving your comptroller and trying to figure out what's it going to cost. And does that cost amortized over the period of the thing? How long? If we're making a 50-year energy choice, who's paying for it in year 1, year 2, year 10, year 25, year 50? And then the question becomes, well, who lives in the places where that thing is going to be, and what kinds of impacts are that going to have? Like, all of these things go into building the business, what should be the business case for whether or not you do a thing. Because being a governor, being a comptroller, is just being the CFO of the state to figure out what's going to happen with the resources. And that includes how people will experience it. So I do think that we are in a really interesting time where there's way more options than there have been.
Yes. Yes.
And there's no chance that like 6 people that got picked that nobody knows making a decision without talking to anyone else can decide what the right mix of energy is for your neighborhood, your community. It's like the worst HOA you've ever been in. Like, yeah, at some point, the experiences of people who are making decisions using your power actually have to represent you. So whether that is the Public Service Commission, where there are a group of people who are making real everyday decisions. In some places, that gets voted on, just like everything else. The question is, do people do the homework that they do before they cast that vote? Or are they thinking about the top of the ticket, the bottom of the ticket, wherever they are actually focused? Most people are not focused on who the dog catcher is, who's going to decide what power mix is going in, whether or not utilities actually have to pay what you should pay given how much resources they have, and whether or not they're factoring in if their constituents would feel that way. So I think calling for equity at FERC, calling for energy at the PSC, equity at the PSC, calling for equity is just saying, make sure everyone's in the conversation in this moment so that we don't have to keep having it.
Yeah. But they can, that legislators and commissioners can have a real impact,
Yes. They have an impact might be they have an impact that's probably the most important.
Yeah.
And they're virtually invisible.
Yeah.
It's like zoning. So much of what we fight about happens at the level of zoning. And you could show up to a hearing 3 years into the thing and try to make something happen. But I assure you, there's been 100 decisions that were made that limit the decisions you could make at the moment you realize this is going to impact you. And so who your commissioner is, how they are chosen, if they're elected, when they have to respond to, whether or not they have worked at that utility, and what their relationship is. Are they operating from the same position? Our democracy works best when people advocate for themselves. And so if the commissioner and the utilities are the same people, where's the conflict that makes us do the better thing? Where's the healthy tension that allows us to make a choice that actually factors in the life cycle cost? Because if it's just a bunch of people who are getting paid today, why would they worry about tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, I've done work in New Mexico, and I have to say New Mexico has a nice mix, okay? Because we do. There's a lot of, even within the commission, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm so proud of them. I'm a shout out to Pat O'Connell. Love you, Pat. So, all right. Okay. What a conversation. We can keep on going, but I have to ask about climate critical, your work there. It's so, I'm sure we can have a whole show on that, and maybe we will. But so anyway, to remind people, climate, well, I'm going to ask you, right? So much work needs to be done, and so many environmentalists or advocates are out there doing it. And if they've been doing it for a long time, they can get burnt out pretty fast. And by the way, it must be working because you have a lot of energy. So I want to know what's the work that you do that helps folks who have been tirelessly working and in this capacity?
Sure. So Climate Critical is a support group. What it says is that if you have focused on a problem that is the scale of the entire planet, the odds are already against you. And so showing up as a person with good self-esteem, a good moral compass, and a project that you like is not enough to maintain the energy over time to resolve it. And so if you've been working on climate for a week, it's exhausting. If you were working on it for 5 years, it's exhausting. If you worked on it for decades, it's exhausting because the answers they show up in decades. And so fighting for the people who fight for the planet, which is what we do, is making sure that the work of doing climate and environmental work makes room for you to be a person. Some days are good days, some days are bad. And we did a study in our second year that was a movement survey of 108 different types of people who do climate and environmental work, and asked them, are you burned out? And they said the answer was burned out, a little burned out, very burned out, and everybody was really burned out. So one of the things that says is that even when we're disagreeing at the lowest possible level, which means the fights are uglier and nastier and meaner and more personal, because the big project of what's happening with the planet is one of several conflicts you have to face every day. So if the quality of your life while you're trying to fight for a project that gives the whole planet more time is really hostile, then it's harder for you to keep showing up for that work.
Yes.
And so making sure that people have humane hours, that there's enough people in the workforce so that you could take a break. Like when you do work that is meaningful to who you are as a person, it's kind of hard to turn that off at 5 o'clock. You don't care about whether there are healthy baby seals in a place that's melting from 9 to 5, and then suddenly you don't think about it when it's time to have your dinner.
Yeah.
But if you are one of only a handful of people focused on your issue, and because of the way that work is resourced, you don't know who's coming behind you to do that work, it becomes a part of your identity, and so does the grief, which means you show up every day as the toxic person at work. So what we're trying to do is make the workplace less sucky, less toxic.
That's a great tagline. Less sucky. Okay.
Yes, let's just make work less sucky. Like the Earth's already in a spiral. You don't have to join. That's basically what we're trying to do. If you can get some naps, take some rest, and have a good policy for holidays, breaks, and staffing, you become a person who's jazzed to do your job every day. And because the wins and losses take so long, we need people who are jazzed. Also, just so we could be a better commercial. Like you can say whatever you want about the Aquanet ladies, but they were working of aesthetic, like they had if you look at today's environmentalists, most of us look exhausted, bedraggled, and like every fear we've ever had, we're carrying it in our molecules. And that's not really a good commercial for new people joining.
No.
So
it's not. Come join our club,
right.
and look like me in 10,
yes.
15 years.
So some of it is helping people develop a work practice that allows them to do this work in the generations it takes to survive. And that involves remembering how to rest, developing a culture where you're not labeled as a liability. Like environment is not different from other forms of work where you are as good as your book of business. And if your book of business means you have to show up 364 days a year, the person who shows up sucks. But if your book of business is a we project where we're all able to take the space that we need, and that the book of businesses are institutional, organizational, our long-term goals actually being realized, not us fighting for our moment in the sun, then it becomes an easier place to do work that takes a long time.
Yeah.
So it's been fun to cultivate that.
Wow, it's so cool. I can totally relate, and I've said this before. A friend of mine, her name is Gay, and she said, if you're into green, you're going to get black and blue. Okay. And like, I can relate to that. I've been involved for many years as well. And there's been times just can't, it's just, what are you going to do? Because the work that you're doing is also, it's for generations to come too. So you might not get that, quick fix of satisfaction, of instant gratification, because it's like not now, but you're doing it for our children going forward. So thank you for doing that. Thank you, really a big thank you for doing that for so many people. I know it's highly, highly needed.
It's fun. It's fun to watch people remember that taking a break actually makes you like that. What I get out of it is watching the light bulb come on when people realize that the hobby they like, that being a person who likes to cook or likes to dance or likes to sing or has hobbies other than just pointing their finger at people and waving about how they're doing things wrong, like remembering the part of them that made them get into it is self gratifying. It's
Oh,
like it because what the thing that we're fighting against is the dopamine hit that comes from watching people fight. If you watch people fight at the margins, you see a lot of people fighting as hard as they've ever fought. You can get addicted to that stupidness. Like seeing people push themselves further, and you constantly see that, you can be locked into that cycle. Learning how to take the pauses and to fight at a level where you're actually arguing for what you need, not out of desperation, but out of a sense that there is a we, it actually makes it easier to have all these conversations. So like it's easier to have a conversation about what are the externalities of a pipeline or a wind farm if you don't feel like you're on your last nerve.
yeah. Yeah. So check it out. Check it out. Climate Critical. What's the website? Is it
Oh yeah,
.org?
we're climatecritical.earth because we're Team Earth. So our team's actually pretty big and growing because you're either here for Team Earth or you have a ticket to ride somewhere else, in which case you could just help us out. So we're climatecritical.earth.
All right. So here's my final question for you. Okay. If you, I think you've already done it, but I'm going to just say it. If you can make your mark in energy justice, let's just say even going forward, what that, if you could, let me say it again. If you can make your mark in energy justice, that would leave a legacy, a lasting legacy going forward. What would that be?
Ah, that having energy justice is not a luxury item. Ooh. Like if having the opportunity to choose from the basket of energy felt like something everybody could do, that feels like rest. That feels like a luxury. I would be thrilled to be connected to that because frankly, that is the work.
Wow. Wow. Right. There you go. You're the real deal, my dear. Tamara,
Good.
thank you so much for coming on. How can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So I used to say that if you want to fight with me, you should just go to X where everyone is fighting with everyone all the time. So I'm TAMARAITY on all the things. So I'm temerity on all the things. And outside of that, we have blogs for at EGA. We have a blog at Climate Critical. We have a blog, and frankly, it is my honor to be able to have conversations like these where we take the thing that feels technical and break it down to its basic point. So happy to be in dialogue with folks about that and to bring the conversation closer to you because you're already in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have, that's a superpower of yours to be able to break it down to like just the basics. Thank you so much for being with me today, and for all of you that for listening. Please put your comments and love notes into the comments for Tamara and myself and Just Power. That's the name of my show, Just Power. If you love it, give us 5 stars. Please also subscribe to us. We're on Apple and Spotify, and we have a YouTube channel too. And remember, though, this is it. Like it's time is now to create sustainable, equitable, reliable energy that leaves no one behind. And that's why we're here. We're all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.
The Just Power podcast is brought to you by New Mexico State University and Mind Over Markets, helping clean energy, clean tech, and regenerative businesses craft clear and compelling messaging that scales. Want to continue this conversation with Carolyn? Follow her on LinkedIn and follow the Just Power podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. And for more intriguing conversations, follow New Mexico State University's microlearning social pages on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube.